morning. Good morning and welcome to California Wildlife Day 2022. Our theme this year is Connecting Communities, Wildlife, and Watershed. I am your host for today, Marie Butcher. I'm part of the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy. Um, as people file in from the waiting room, we just want to say that we are so grateful that you are here, that you found us today. We're also grateful for the rain. The rain is a song seldom sung in California, and maybe it's our anthem that is just begun. I feel so grateful that we have a little splash of rain today. We're again grateful for all of you joining us for this annual event, which we have produced uh, pre-COVID times. We have been here all in person, up to 800 people on the green. That sounds like a scary number now. So here we are in the Zoom room. Last year we were all virtual. This year we are doing a combination of having this event both online and in person in the afternoon. So just to clarify, this session will be held from 10 to 1 online in the Zoom room, and then we will be following it up in person at Garland with walks, rain or shine, from 1 to 3. And we have a wonderful program for you today. I would like to start with an acknowledgement of the First Peoples of this area upon whose land we sit. We are so grateful for their participation today. In fact, we have tribal members from Ohlone Rumsen, Rumsen Castanoan, and Esalen tribe members all with us in various capacities for the morning session and afternoon session, leading walks and land acknowledgements, songs, and so much more. So please join us for as much of the day as you would like. Also, just a few remarks about the Zoom settings. So this is a webinar style format. So thank you and good morning to the people on the call. Thank you for already praising us and sending us blessings. We are so grateful for that. So yes, I think you're all experienced Zoom people by now. So the chat space is the space to just send your praise and hellos. We would love to see where people are zooming in from. So say your name and where you're zooming in from. Also, if you want to tell us about any comments can go in the chat, and then the Q&A is really dedicated for the panels. We will have 3 panels this morning, moderated by our staff with special guests on the following topics: the intersection of wildlife and humans, creating fire-safe communities, and water and wildlife. Each panel will be approximately 30 minutes or 30 to 35 minutes, followed by a 10-minute Q&A session where we will be attending to as many questions as we can from the Q&A section. If at any time during this session you do have any logistical questions or challenges, you can ask that in the chat, and we do have some tech folk on hand to perhaps assist. So we will have the 3 panels, and then at the end of our session, we will have some lovely artwork from the children who have participated in this event. We always have participation from our local schools, sharing their artwork, poetry, and science submissions. These are also posted on site at Garland Ranch Regional Park here in the Park District. Finally, I would like to note that this session will be recorded and made available at a later date on our Carmel River Watershed Conservancy YouTube site, as are all of our programming from last year, which is really some wonderful archived material that you may want to visit. This event is brought to you by the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy and the Monterey Peninsula Park District, and of course, our beloved founder and co-founder, Beverly Iyer. So thank you to all the individuals and organizations that have made this event possible. We hope you enjoy your experience at CWD 2022, and I would like to turn the mic over to our president of the board, Lauren Latondra.
Welcome, everyone. I am Lauren Latondra, the president and chair of the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy Board, and we're welcoming you to this California Wildlife Day hybrid celebration. Our mission at the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy is to preserve and eventually restore the Carmel River and its watershed to its former health and beauty. And I said hybrid event because of the continuing threat of COVID, but due to the thankfully diminishing case counts, we are able to add some in-person activities to this event this afternoon. California Wildlife Day is an integral part of our Conservancy's mission, as it is our wildlife that are the markers or indicators of the health of the watershed. With several hundred species of wildlife in California that are listed as either endangered or threatened, it is imperative that we focus our attention and resources on their preservation and to avoid their extinction. Also, watersheds need to have a balance of predators and prey. And if we lose any of our watershed species, that balance could be disrupted and certain species become dangerously overpopulated. California is leading the way in tackling some of these challenges. It has more land under biodiversity protection than any of the other lower 48 states, but it's also home to high concentrations of imperiled species. This celebration is an annual event on or near the day of the spring equinox. This event today was made possible by the generosity of the originator, creator of the idea for California Wildlife Day, Beverly Eyre. We joined with Beverly to craft a legislative resolution to establish California Wildlife Day as an annual statewide event. And the resolution was co-authored by former State Senator Bill Monning and Assembly Member Mark Stone, and was passed unanimously by both houses of the California legislature. Now I would like to read a message from the creator of California Wildlife Day, Beverly Eyre. Hello, hello, dear friends and family, welcome all. We are here to celebrate California Wildlife Day 2022 on spring equinox, Mother Nature's birthday. The perfect day to celebrate and embrace our extraordinary wildlife, wildlands, wildflowers, wild rivers, mountains, skies, and oceans. We are here to commit ourselves again to answer the call of our beloved and cherished wildlife, to help protect them and their habitat, their sanctuaries, their means to move about and maintain their precious but vulnerable web of life. This year, we feel a deep need to also extend and include in our love, our support for Ukraine. There are people who show us what true courage and commitment can be, and recognize also the terrible violence war has unleashed against their natural world, their wildlife, their forests, their blue skies and fields of golden sunflowers. It is one world we live in. We pray for peace. We gather here today to say that we are here to help in any way that we can and express our joy and gratitude for being able to do so. Spring equinox heralds life and the renewal of life, the turning of the great water wheel of time. Spring equinox is Mother Nature's way to tell us that more light is on the way every day, more light now, more light. And California Wildlife Day is our way to say, more light is on the way every day, more light now, more light. Thank you, Beverly, for getting us started. It's now my pleasure and honor to introduce to you a co-founder of California Wildlife Day, and former State Senator Bill Monning.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren, and I want to thank Marie and Beverly Eyre and Inspiration, and one of the co-conspirators with Lauren and others to bring this recognition and the establishment of the California Wildlife Day. I also want to just acknowledge the Ohlone, Rumson, Esalen, community members who might be with us today, and perhaps more importantly, we link this day of California Wildlife Day to learning from the stewardship of the indigenous communities, the first communities to inhabit this Central California area. But I just really want to acknowledge all of the participants, the people that are keeping California Wildlife Day recognition moving forward. I think more than symbolic, it's a critical opportunity as we mark the spring equinox to take stock of endangered species, of continued drought, of the climate crisis, and how our stewardship of the land and of precious natural resources is very much connected to the future of humanity and the human species. We're all interconnected, and California Wildlife Day is an opportunity to recognize that as we move forward. I was also appreciative of Beverly for acknowledging the crisis in Ukraine. It seems like it's far away from those of us here in California, and yet we are all connected in that both human tragedy, but we also know that species and wildlife and pets, children, habitat, all being impacted by this horrific invasion and exercise of military force. So we are all connected, and I think part of this day should be taking stock of those connections. I also want to acknowledge the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District, which has also been a partner in expanding and preserving lands, and so many other partners in this region who recognize the critical importance of our natural habitats and how we, as active community members, have both a responsibility and an opportunity to do our part, whether it's through land conservation, water conservation, political and public participation. We're up against huge forces and years and decades, and in some senses, centuries of wrong priorities, mismanagement of priorities, that we must now address, and address with a sense of urgency. But I think we will be empowered by the beauty of these natural resources that we're so lucky to live in this region, from land to sea, from valleys to fields, and to empower our continued work by inhaling the essence of what surrounds us every day. So thank you for this opportunity. It was indeed an honor to carry SCR 23 in 2017 with my partner, Assemblymember Mark Stone at the time, and that we give life to this spring equinox each and every year and build out to protect, preserve, and pass on to future generations our precious local habitat. So thank you all. It looks like a day full of amazing activities for those who can join at Garland Ranch and participate live. How wonderful that is this year. And as Marie said, yeah, a little bit of rain, but a little water never hurt anybody. And we certainly welcome whatever rainfall we can bring in today. So thank you all. Blessings to all, and to a great day and a wonderful spring equinox ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next, I have the honor of introducing to you our Congressman Jimmy Panetta, who lives right near the site of this California Wildlife Day event, to be followed by State Senator John Laird and 5th District Supervisor Mary Adams.
Hey everybody, it's Jimmy Panetta, and thank you so much for having me speak to you, albeit virtually, for this year's California Wildlife Day. Look, as someone who grew up in Carmel Valley and who grew up on and in the Carmel River, and who made sure my 2 girls were also raised in Carmel Valley, and who were also able to sneak down to the bucket and swim in the Carmel River, and yeah, as part of a family who often takes advantage of our local parks, especially Garland Park, I'm so proud of all that you do at the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy and the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District to ensure that our river and our parks are not just part of our families and fond memories, but also an integral part of our community. So thank you. I appreciate it. What you do through your work with events like this is really remind us and help us figure out how we can best support something that we cherish and value on the Central Coast. And of course, that's our environment and its connection to who we are and what we stand for now and in the future. Now, this year's core topics at your event, wildlife and watersheds, are also two issues that I've been fighting for in the United States Congress. I've been doing that by authoring pieces of legislation that would help prevent wildfires and, protect our monarch butterflies. Now, as we saw in January, no longer is it just a wildfire season around here, nor is it like that throughout the American West. It's really become a wildfire year. And that's why I introduced several bills to help prevent wildfire in our federal lands. The Wildfire Emergency Safety Act is a bill that would dedicate funds to clear dead and dying fuels on federal lands in a very environmentally responsible way. The next bill is the Save Our Forests Act, which would provide funding for more Forest Service personnel that would help prevent people from starting wildfires. And then there's my Replant Act, a bill that would provide funding for the reforestation of certain parts of our national forests and that would ultimately help our watersheds, especially in areas that have suffered wildfires. Now, although the first two bills are still making their way through the legislative process, I'm proud to say and report to you that the Replant Act was recently signed into law as part of the massive infrastructure bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The IIJA, through the IIJA, I was able to put in also another bill of mine, which is called the Monarch and Pollinator Highway Act. That's legislation that would establish the federal grant program to help address the decline of pollinator populations, including our very own monarch butterfly. And it would do that all across the American West. Now, look, fortunately, I think we've read the reports that the numbers of the monarch butterflies are much better this year. However, they're not like they used to be when I was a kid and would visit the Monarch Grove Sanctuary in Pacific Grove. That's why my legislation is so important to support state and local conservation efforts that would bolster the monarch butterfly population. As a federal representative of the place that I've always called home, I'm proud of the work that we're doing in Congress, but I also know that we got a lot more work to do when it comes to protecting our watersheds and our wildlife. Now, we can't do it all in Congress. That's why your efforts for our local rivers and our parks are so very important. So thanks for all you do. Thanks for what you're talking about at this conference. And I look forward to our work at all levels, our work together to protect, to promote, and to perpetuate the environment of this place that our families have and will continue to call our home. Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you around the district soon. Bye.
This conference, the highlight of which is connecting Wild John Laird, and today. Hello, this is Senator John Laird, and today I want to salute the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy and the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District for putting on this conference, the highlight of which is connecting wildlands and watersheds. And that is so important these days in our changing climate, because watersheds are challenged, there's less water, and as the climate changes, it is also changing wildlife patterns, both in terms of where wildlife paths are, where they can survive in the same way, and it's really worthy of all of us working together. So I just want to salute you for getting together to talk about that today, and look forward to working in continued partnership to that effort. We have a lot of work to do.
Everyone, California Wildlife Day is such a special celebration for Monterey County and for the state. And what has made it so special is that it originated right here in Monterey County in District 5 in Carmel Valley. A group of passionate community members were inspired by the beauty of the natural spaces that we get to call home. They were alarmed by the loss of the biodiversity and the decline of our natural environment. So in order to bring attention to protecting and conserving our natural environment, and with the support of our retired State Senator Bill Monning and Assemblymember Mark Stone, the entire state of California now celebrates California Wildlife Day. I'm so pleased to be able to celebrate this day with you all on the spring equinox, and I am so very grateful to live in Monterey County and have the honor of representing District 5 that is just full of incredible open spaces for all of us to enjoy. Thank you to the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy for hosting this annual event and for leading our community in conservation of our natural resources. I hope our residents and visitors can come together, get outside, and continue to enjoy these beautiful open spaces. Thanks. Enjoy yourself.
Thank you for those words from all of our officials. And of course, we also want to bring in a representative of the parks, Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District. So if our representative is available, Rafael Payan, who's our general manager, was intending to offer some brief remarks, but he's having some internet challenges. So Jackie Nelson, who is my co-leader in this event, will be offering a few words if she is ready. She is.
Hello, it is my honor. Excuse us, we're having a little technical difficulty. I will hold this while we turn the other one off. Hi, I'm Jackie Nelson and with the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District, and it is my honor to represent the Park District at this California Wildlife Day event. And I would like to thank our founders, Lauren Latendra and Beverly Iyer and Bill Monning and Mark Stone for creating a day that we celebrate the diversity of our wildlife. And it's really, Bill had said in his opening that a little rain never hurts anyone. And it's funny for us and a little bit ironic that when we do these in-person events, and I'm at Garland Park right now, that we often get rain, which is wonderful for the wildlife. And it's also an amazing part of what formed the watershed here at the Carmel River and the Carmel River watershed. So a little rain never hurt anyone. And yet it is so amazing and so fantastic for allowing us to live in a community where we gather around the water and that we celebrate life, because without water, we would not have life. And the community that gathers around here has been here for thousands of years and will continue to be here with our water conservation and our ability to have plants and animals living in harmony. And that's including all beings as well as human beings. And so today is a special day. We will have panelists talking about living with wildlife, water conservation, the learning to navigate around fires. We thank all our panelists. We thank our afternoon presenters who will be giving hikes. We'll have wild raptors, live raptors out here giving us conservation messages. Please enjoy your webinar and come out to Garland Ranch Regional Park in Carmel Valley this afternoon from 1 to 3. Thank you and have a wonderful California Wildlife Day. And know that we share it and celebrate it on the spring equinox each year. Marie?
Thank you so much, Jackie. We're so grateful for all you do and your full team. We couldn't do it without you. We're a full team. So grateful. Now we are so honored to have a native blessing from Linda Yamane, who's been part of our California Wildlife Day from the inception. So she will offer us a Ohlone Rumsen blessing, and then we will transition to our first panel. So please enjoy the words of Linda Yamane and her blessing.
Mishish Jarwai, Imiama, in Mishish I, Huya California Wildlife Day 2022. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to California Wildlife Day 2022. Ka inkarakt, Linda Yamane, in ne chia katawar, Mishich Pisoik ama Rumsen, in Sha'ama Eslan. My name is Linda Yamane, and today I'm here to remember and honor the land's first peoples, my Rumsen Ohlone ancestors, as well as our Eslan neighbors. Our Rumsen and Eslan ancestors spoke very different languages, reflecting their different ancient origins. But today, we all share the same love and respect for this land and feel the deep connection that comes from knowing that we are rooted by bloodlines and thousands of years of history to this area. Since this year's theme focuses on wildlife and watersheds, I thought I'd share a Rumsen story about Utis Oreshakai, 2 bears. A long time ago, there were 2 bears, and one said to the other, "I wonder how big the world is." The other answered, who knows? How are we going to find out? Those 2 bears were talking together, and one said, "You walk that way towards the south, and I'll go north, and then we'll meet back here together again. You'll tell me what you saw, and I'll tell you what I saw along the way. Each place you go, give it a name, so we'll know what it's called, and I'll do the same thing in all the places I go. Then we'll meet and talk again." So they went. I don't know how long they were gone. No one knows how many years it was before they met again at the Carmel River, but it was a long time they were gone. "What did you see?" one asked. "Oh," he said, "I saw many things. It was bad country, really bad, all of it. I saw an ocean with black water, and I passed a huge river that was very strong with wild animals in it. They found that the world was very large, with lots of water, rocks, and ravines everywhere." For many years after, those 2 bears were seen talking together at the Carmel River, talking about all the places they had been. And it sounds to me like they decided right here at home along the Carmel River was the very best place of all. Here's a song I created in my Rumsen language about these 2 bears talking to each other at the Carmel River and how they went out to see the whole world. Uti soresha kairi jano miki huyati ruswa chorara utiri jano miki uti soresha kai watini ki huya ayo imesha pire ayo imesha pire. Shoo-doo-doo. Thank you and blessings. Enjoy the day.
Shururu, indeed. Thank you. That is such a beautiful blessing. Thank you. Shururu, of course, means thank you in Rumsen language. So we're so grateful again for everyone's participation. And we're just going to get started right away with our first panel. And I will be your MC for this event. Yes, the story of the 2 bears is lovely, and she does so many wonderful stories. You can listen to some of her stories from last year's event also online on our YouTube channel. Our first panel is the intersection of wildlife and humans. Of course, we are really in their territory. And so we just have to remind ourselves, right? It's always a coming back and remembering, a deep remembering of our relationship to the whole ecosystem, and that we are just one being in this intricate web of life. We're always intersecting and sharing space and with our animal friends and neighbors. For me, I see the wild turkeys walking down the street, the mule deer, the cacophony of birds and squirrels and other creatures. And it's this symphony that really is what inspires me every day. So I would love to invite people to just drop names of animals and creatures that they live with in the chat while we get started. Like, who are your wildlife friends? Who do you share space with? Our goal in this session is to explore those intersections and interconnections with wildlife. And a question I would offer for everyone to ponder while we get started is, how can we be better stewards? How can we know the wildlife around us? How can we mitigate the negative human impacts on species and habitat? So you can see now that our panelists have joined us. I'll start but with just brief introductions, and we do have a little more detailed information about them available on our slide that will be coming in a minute. But Kelly Sorensen is the executive director of the Ventana Wildlife Society and serves as director of the board for the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District. So he'll be able to tell us so much about the condors, how they have survived recent fires and other threats. He is such a living testament to how much one person can affect change and bring change to one species in particular on our Central Coast. Jen Hunter is an amazing biologist. She's the resident director of the Hastings Natural History Reservation and hosts researchers on the property in our Upper Carmel Valley watershed. She has hosted us for many events. We've had workshops and students out on the property. It's such a wonderful experience, and I hope at some point you all can visit the Hastings Natural History Reserve. Bart Kalowski is a wildlife biologist and co-facilitator of the Bay Area Tracking Club, and he's an iNaturalist guru who can really help us identify all sorts of wildlife on the trail. And he does tracking events, and he also has an event from last year. In fact, all three of them participated in last year's session. So please do check out our archives on our YouTube channel. So to frame our discussion today, I'd like for us to all consider the perspective that we are just one species in this great ecosystem of life, and that we have kinship to all of nature. Sylvia Earle, who's the great ocean scientist, says the observations that have developed over the years have given us perspective about where we fit in. We are newcomers, really recent arrivals on a planet that is 4.5 billion years old. Many of you may also know the poet, essayist, naturalist, native expert Robin Waller Kimmerer, who speaks about our kinship to nature and uses the word ki to indicate the kinship and energy of all living beings. She says things like, ki is singing up the sun. Ki runs through the branches on squirrel feet. Ki howls at the moon. Ki's branches sway in the pine-scented breeze, and all alive in our language as in our world. So I want us to be just in that spirit of kinship as we have our conversation. And we're going to consider how we interact with wildlife in our direct watershed right here. So I'd like to just open the panel by asking the panelists how long you've been observing wildlife and what inspired you to serve in the role you are presently serving. It often starts in youth, but I'd like to just kind of open the session with that kind of simple question. And I'll start with you, Jen. What was that inspiration that brought you into the world you're in right now?
That's a really interesting question. And it did start when I was a kid, but I grew up in a city. And so my interactions with the outside world were largely in city parks and lakes and things like that near my home. And when I was in college, I sort of went through the phase where I thought I was going to major in every possible discipline in college. And one of the really transformative experiences for me is when I went on a research trip to Namibia, which is located in Southwest Africa. And I'd always kind of watched animals and thought about sort of how they, move through the world. But it wasn't until that trip where I really sort of began to understand more sort of holistically how the role that people play in structuring ecosystems, and then these conflicts that can arise with some animals that live amongst people who can be really, really dangerous. And so when I came back and I sort of thought, well, this is the thing I'm going to do. And so from that point on, I kind of pursued a career that would allow me kind of to be outside a lot and to spend a lot of time thinking about animals and working closely with animals. And so that's kind of where I got my start.
Thanks, Jen. What about you, Bart?
My interest in nature and wildlife also started in college. While I was studying at UC Santa Cruz, I was studying physics, but I took advantage of the many recreational activities that were being offered through the rec center there. And I took some classes on tracking and survival skills. And I just kind of got hooked on the possibility of learning how to read a landscape and knowing what type of plants have practical applications and learning to see patterns that animals leave behind. So I kind of continued learning along that line even after college, when I was serving as a naturalist for several outdoor schools around the Bay Area and some summer camps. And when I eventually decided to get my master's degree at CSUMB, I started working as a student aide for the photo cleanup project. And then when the wildlife biologist position opened up there, it was just a perfect fit for me because I did my master's work on Fort Ord, on wildlife on Fort Ord, and I was familiar with the project, and it was just a great opportunity to continue in that new capacity there.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And so I'm seeing a thread of education, and I know Kelly has done all these amazing educational projects through your organization, Ventana Wildlife Society. So what about you? When did you get your start into this space?
Excuse me. I always loved animals. When I was a little kid, I remember flipping through the magazines and getting upset when I saw animals that were hurt. And then later on, when I was a teenager, my fascination for wildlife actually turned to hunting and fishing. And then later, I kind of shifted more toward photography. But I've always had this love of animals. And I guess this dates me, but right after the Endangered Species Act was passed, I was a little kid growing up learning about animals and learning about the concept of being endangered and imperiled. And I remember feeling very disappointed that the people before us left the world in the condition that it was in. And then later on, I found a red-tailed hawk nest in the woods that I used to run around in. I grew up in a real rural part of West Virginia. And those hawks opened up my heart to birds of prey like no other animal has been able to, and led to an opportunity to rehab individual birds of prey and then release them back to the wild. And that's what led to a lifelong career of endangered species recovery that started with peregrine falcons and bald eagles and now California condors. So from a young age, I found my calling, and I've been blessed with the opportunities to pursue it.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And I know you just recently conducted an interview about the Endangered Species Act, which is viewable on your site. So we're so grateful for your work. So I'm curious about, our daily kind of interactions and intersections. I use the word intersection and crossroads where we actually encounter wildlife multiple times during our day. And whether it is an individual taking their dog for a walk and having an incident with a coyote, or a hiker concerned about encountering a mountain lion or other animal out in the wild, or just like how we interface with birds in our local communities. And so I was wondering if you all could chime in about recommendations you have about really keeping habitats safe for all these animals, and also for mitigating any negative encounters between pets or humans and the wild species. So I guess I'll start with Jen as the skunk lover. Like, how can we really take care of our skunks?
Skunks are fine. They can take care of themselves. We all are familiar with what they're capable of. I think in the sort of, for your broader question, I think one of the things that is maybe sort of an unpopular suggestion is that we keep our dogs leashed. I think that a lot of animal encounters that are negative arise when you have an animal that feels like a wild animal that feels threatened. And oftentimes dogs can be major contributors of that. We all know that skunks are able to defend themselves by spraying. And, when I give a skunk talk and I ask how many people have been sprayed or had a pet sprayed by a dog, it's a lot of people, myself included. The dog, not me. And so I think that that's a major contribution that we can make, particularly in parks where there is an off-leash policy. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense to let your dog run, and they certainly enjoy it. But there are other times where maybe that's not quite so wise. Areas or times of day like near dawn and dusk when animals are more active. So that's a big one. That's something that I've certainly heard from people about, and I have seen myself. When dogs tangle with coyotes and things like that. So that's my big suggestion.
Yeah. Bart, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it ties into just a larger topic of knowing the basics of your local wildlife and what are the natural patterns that they exhibit, and what are some things maybe to look out for. When you go outside at night to throw away the trash and you see a skunk with its tail raised, that's totally normal behavior. And if you just give it its space, you'll be fine. But if you see a skunk in the middle of the day, that's likely means that something's off. Those nocturnal animals don't come out during the day when they're healthy. And so watch out for patterns that are not normal. If you're driving by in a car and you see a deer run across your road, you should slow down, because usually where there's one deer, there's more than one. They're often in the herd. As far as for mountain lions, it's important to just stay aware of your surroundings. Certainly, we have mountain lions in our area. They're probably more common around us than we realize. And so it's important to know where you go, letting other people know where you go when you plan to come back, and just be aware of your surroundings.
Thank you. And Kelly, you've done so much work with the condors and bringing them back from an endangered species to now. Are they delisted, or are they still considered threatened? And I know you have a lot of recommendations about just like our daily practices with chemical use or other things that we should be really aware of. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to piggyback on what Jen said about dogs and emphasize that certain habitats are also particularly vulnerable. And in the backdrop you see in my photo here, beach habitat is critically important for snowy plover, western snowy plover. And, dogs off leash are much more of a disturbance than when on leash. And, that's just another really important recommendation to, to find a balance, while sharing the beach with our wildlife. So if dogs are allowed, it's greatly appreciated to have them on leash. But you're asking about condors, and then I think back about a comment that I believe Senator Monning said about the birds and other wildlife being excellent indicators of the environment, and the condor is a really great example of that. There's really 3 or 4 different important mortality factors for that species, and the most important by far is lead poisoning. And they get that predominantly, if not entirely, from the ingestion of lead ammunition. So my hunting background tells me, we got to work with hunters and ranchers and encourage a switch to non-lead. And my organization has been doing that for almost 10 years now. The condor also has, thankfully, not a very big deal, but does in some females, they're laying slightly thinned eggs because of the past use of the pesticide DDT that's still in the environment. Another great lesson that we should learn, that we should test things out first before putting them into use. I mean, DDT almost wiped out bald eagles, peregrine falcons, brown pelicans, and a whole host of other species. Probably one of the most devastating environmental disasters of the last century. But thankfully today it is only slightly depressing condor reproduction, and on a statewide level they're doing just fine. So dodged a bullet there, so to speak. But like I said, the ammunition is the biggest problem. In terms of other things we can do to help on a very small scale, but it is nonetheless important. Some condor chicks die from ingesting trash, little bits of trash that are often confused by the parents for what we suspect they're looking for bone to bring back to their chick because they need calcium. Unfortunately, they get confused and they bring things like PVC pipe that look very similar. And those are indigestible, so it can actually cause deaths of chicks. So, keeping the environment clean is important for all wildlife, and even the condor. So, those are the main issues. Power lines included, but there's not a whole lot we can do about that except for perhaps advocate for power lines to be underground in certain key areas. So you look at the condor and you realize there's a lot of different ways that this bird is serving as an indicator. And it also tells me that it's entirely possible to be successful with this species. And that's exciting to me. That's what keeps me coming to work every day. The bald eagle's fully restored, the peregrine falcon's fully restored. Both of those are owed to the banning of DDT, the discontinued use of DDT. For the condor, it'll be similar. If we can effectively switch the majority of hunters and ranchers to non-lead ammunition, which is actually a very high performing product, and a lot of people do like it, then we will be successful with this species too. And it's amazing to me, you think about just that one little change in behavior or the things we do can make just a profound impact. Just really amazing to me. When I first started, people told me I was crazy, that the condor was a dinosaur relic, a lost cause. I've been laughing at them ever since, and I can't wait to be fully successful, though we're not there yet.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Yeah, thanks for those. It is specific and simple behavioral changes on our parts that can make a huge difference. I'm thinking about the next 2 panels and how we're going to be connecting the themes of fire and water into this conversation. And we're just acutely aware of the mega drought in California. We're grateful that we had a few drops of rain today. I mean, it still feels like kind of a teaser. And we know that water is just, all life depends on water. And so those animals that get displaced during fire are going to be scattering to different zones to try and find water. The newts are going to be struggling if there aren't if there isn't enough water. All species are going to be struggling. Jen, since you had the fire come right up close to the property at Hastings, I'm going to start with you again about just like being and we'll talk further about preparedness for fire and how to conserve water in the future panels. But just kind of thinking about all of these, how we have to be even more mindful today than ever about our relationship and what we do when we do have climatic events, fire or extreme drought.
Well, yeah, I mean, so we burned in the river fire in August 2020. We burned about 600 acres of the reserve. And it actually impacted a lot of where our buildings are too, and we really lucked out and didn't lose any major infrastructure. But we can see sort of the compounding effects of that fire as time has passed. And so these ecosystems were all basically designed to burn. And so, while at the moment it feels very catastrophic, the plants recover really, really quickly. And there are places that, months out, you wouldn't even really have known a fire had swept through that area. There are other ecosystem types like chaparral that burn really, really well, and it helps the plants and the plant health, but it also has sort of a longer scar on the landscape. And so, when you couple that and that impacts of that fire with the way that our precipitation has happened since that fire, we have these kind of compounding effects that are happening out here now. So for example, we had a huge debris flow that came off this burned canyon this year. And so we're on Finch Creek, which is a major spawning habitat for our steelhead. And so that debris flow deposited like 6 to 8 inches of mud over the stream bed as it kind of came down. And we haven't had enough water, we haven't had storms to flush that out. And so now we're looking at a situation where, if we have fish that make it up this far, which honestly, I'm not confident that's going to happen, is that the spawning habitat's now been compromised because of the cobble and the importance of the morphology of the stream that's now been changed because of this debris flow. And so, you can kind of see how over time these effects can kind of compound on one another and then ultimately impact the ability of species to come up and steelhead in this case, and to persist in these streams. And so that's kind of one example that I've seen firsthand. I think that, when we think about how fire impacts wildlife, there's a whole host of things. There's like the physical displacement part. There's the inability to find food and the inability to find shelter. And then you also have like the physiological things, like when we think about how our lungs are impacted by breathing wildfire smoke for months out of the year, those same effects are impacting wildlife in ways that we can't really or haven't really measured yet. So those are 2 examples of how potentially wildfire and lack of rainfall can impact our species.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bart, what about your observations? You've spent a lot of time in the Fort Ord lands, and it's super dry out there. Are you noticing significant changes, and what are you noticing in this regard?
Well, certainly one of the animals that is affected by these lacks of rains over the last few years is the California tiger salamander, which is our native salamander. Its population is threatened here federally and state threatened. And we're just, because of the lack of rain, we're not seeing the vernal pools that they usually use to breed in fill up with enough water. In fact, many of them are already dry, which on a normal water year, you would see them be filled with water till April, May, maybe even June timeframe. And so these animals depend on these seasonal vernal pools to go in there and breed. And when the vernal pools are dry, they're unable to do that, and they're not unable to reproduce. So certainly a direct effect there for animal that is already threatened due to loss of habitat and habitat fragmentation, also due to hybridization with the introduced invasive species. And so it's sort of like Jen said, it's compounding the effects that many of these species are already facing.
Yeah, thank you. So are there other species of concern that we haven't mentioned yet, Kelly, that are really feeling the effects of this, the changing climate, the continued droughts circumstance?
Well, I'd be remiss to not point out also that the Dolan fire last year, which was started by an arsonist, did take the lives of 9 condors in one night and a 10th bird later, which was the most catastrophic loss of condor life in the history of the program. But having said that, I don't think that fire is going to be a major factor for condors in the long run, just because the circumstances were truly unique. We had a heavy concentration of birds in that one area, and fire burned through at night, and they don't fly at night, and so they were just quite vulnerable. Well, only time will tell, but my hunch is that wildfire is not going to be a huge deal for condors. But one species that's not threatened by any stretch of the imagination across the landscape, but here locally on the Central Coast, I am concerned about the ponderosa pine. I've been coming up to the Santa Lucia Mountains for 25 plus years, and I have seen just in that time fewer and fewer stands of mature pines, ponderosa pines. Santa Lucia fir as well. I'd throw that in the mix too, both because of fire. When really intense fire burns through, especially along ridge tops, it'll just incinerate pine forest. And what comes in afterward is the thick chaparral, which prevents ponderosas from coming in later. So it's essentially a landscape level, forest wide level conversion that's occurring. And ponderosas afford a lot of great snag habitat for purple martins and a ton of other species. So I think there's going to be, I think there should be more attention focused on that ecosystem challenge.
Thank you so much. Yeah, all of these little gems are great for us to take away. And we're actually kind of winding down in with our time and wanting to think about some other recommendations we may have to the listeners and attendees here about really balancing human needs and those of wildlife, because the humans are pretty stressed too these days, right? The two years of COVID and this new kind of altered, adaptations, you can say, that we have made about our interactions, our socialization. Actually, I think one good news about COVID is I think it has increased people going out into nature, connecting more. And so that is my hope, that connection, that hiking, that listening, the deep listening really happens, and that people don't forget that we are sharing this land, this space, this water, this air, and that it really is a privilege and not something to be taken for granted, that we do get to share this space together. So I'd like to go around one more time with your final recommendations and invite the audience to populate the Q&A stream with any specific questions you may have for any of the panelists or the panelists at large. So you can drop your questions in the Q&A section at this time. And I think I'll just keep my same order of asking Jen for kind of final remarks and recommendations. Just what do you want the community to know?
I guess I'll start with saying thanks. I mean, I really appreciate being part of California Wildlife Day. This is my third time participating. And I think that the service that you guys are doing to the community is fantastic. And so I guess my final recommendations would be to think about, oftentimes people feel like there's only one way to enjoy nature and to sort of spend time in the world around them. And that's not always the case. And so, as we think about how, humans kind of fit in to our ecosystem, I think it's important to include everybody in that conversation. And that includes, like Kelly was saying, people who are hunting, people who are fishing, people like me who, when I spend my time in nature, I'm working and I'm sweating and I'm being bitten by bugs and I got poison oak, and it's it's not always, sunshine and butterflies and rainbows. So I think it's really important to think about sort of nature and our natural world holistically and understand that everybody has a different experience out there. And I think the more we can broaden conversations like this to include all of those different kind of constituency groups, the better off we all are. So that's how I'll end it.
Thank you, Jen. And before going to the other two panelists, we have our first question in the Q&A. So I'm just going to start with that. And it is, what relationships do you all have with local tribes to help preserve and protect? That's a wonderful question. And again, we're so grateful for all the tribal participation on the call today and at the Garland Ranch today. We're going to have some wonderful land acknowledgements and other integration of their words and wisdom. So maybe I'll bounce that to Kelly. Have you had like participation with local tribal members?
Well, I'd love to give a shout out to Linda Yamai, who was instrumental in helping us pull in name suggestions and discuss name ideas with First Peoples of the Central Coast. And we had participation from the Ohlone, Rumsen and Esalen and Salinan. We ended up choosing names from those three tribes for condors that were released in San Simeon last year. It was really rewarding. I hope it was rewarding for everybody involved, and look forward to doing that kind of thing. And of course, lots of other meaningful collaborations. And I kind of want to turn to that because the question that you posed really makes me think about what's probably most important is that we need to find ways for people to have meaningful opportunities to interact with wildlife and nature. And when you do interact with wildlife and nature, don't all of a sudden become an expert. Realize that there are experts in the natural world. It's just like any other technical field. There's an expertise that is to be gained, and the experts in the field want to share that knowledge. But it's funny how a lot of times people interact with a wild animal and instantly they're an expert. So be careful of that phenomenon. But find ways to interact with animals and interact with the outside world in meaningful ways. That would be my recommendation.
And also, didn't you have a tribal member on your team is at Ventana Wildlife Society in your education program at one time, just to be specific to the question? Like in the youth that participated last year. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name.
Yeah, sorry.
Was it maybe Isaac or
Asa? I didn't know that she has a Native American.
Chris. Wasn't it Chris? Sorry.
Anyway, yeah.
I'm forgetting his name.
We do also strive to recruit in ways that reflect who we represent and who we serve. On the youth education program, a lot of the constituents we serve are Latina and Latino, so we're actively recruiting for Spanish-speaking individuals and so forth. But anyway. Thank
you. Bart, you're not representing a specific organization, so I don't know if the question is as pertinent for you, but have you had any interaction with our local tribal members through your work?
No, not directly, but I think what's been happening in the community and in the state overall, there's been much more awareness about indigenous ways of management of land and conserved areas. And so prescribed burns are certainly one of the ways that indigenous people have been managing their lands prior to European settlement. And I think it's important to utilize that tool on our conservation lands for the regeneration and restarting of succession. So if it's done in the proper manner, it actually can enhance our biodiversity.
Absolutely. And we're going to be hearing that about that in our next panel on fire that is going to be moderated by Abby Bean. We'll have Chanel Keller on the call, who is a young Esalen member, tribal member, who was actually fighting the last fire. I guess we called it the Colorado fire. I actually drove through that fire on my way home from Big Sur. It was pretty dramatic. And then to find out that she was one of the members fighting that fire was quite extraordinary. So she'll be joining us and talking just about that, about controlled burns and other ways to mitigate the effects of fire and preserve habitat. I think we will go again in I had asked Jen for some final remarks, and I'll ask now Bart and Kelly, and then circle around and see if we have any other questions. So Bart, do you want to tell us any final recommendations you have?
Well, just something I've been thinking about in light of the increased frequency of mega fires and the recent, unfortunately, bleak prognosis from the effects of climate change that has come out. Is the question of how do we build resilient communities? Something that makes Robin Wall Kimmerer's book so compelling. That's essentially about relationships. How do we build relationships with the natural world, and how do we build relationships with each other? And so I think resilient communities will be better adapted to and be better able to deal with these events, whether they're natural disasters, fires, or any other sort of challenges that we may face. And so we have to kind of build on the size and the strength of our networks. We're so happy and grateful that we live in such an amazing place with many areas to enjoy being outside, and we can leverage that to build our communities even stronger, to join hiking groups, birding groups, tracking groups, and participating in events such as this to build our knowledge, to build our communities, and to build our relationships with each other in the natural world.
Thank you so much. I love that. Whoops, there's some echoing. So I'm going to put that question, rhetorical question, in the chat. How do we build resilient communities? I think that's a really good one for us all to resonate with and make those choices when we're literally building, when there's more development, when there's more need for water, when we need to respect habitat, and really be conscious about those relationships with the wildlife and also with each other. So thank you for putting that so succinctly. Kelly, any parting words or recommendations?
Yeah, my final thought is it all is going to require hope as well. It's easy to get discouraged, especially when there's war around the world. There's climate change that we really haven't done a whole lot to fix yet. There's still species out there that are declining and very much so imperiled, like the fakita and Baja, the tiny little dolphin. And you can kind of get overwhelmed if you allow yourself to. But I think it's important to keep the hope up, to do what you can in your community, recognize that we can't do it all, that it's not just one person, it's really all of us. And if you can look back and see that the world is a little bit better, then you've done your job. And that's kind of how I think about the world. And hope is the key to all of that. If you let hope go away, you're kind of in trouble. So I think that's key.
Thank you. That's a wonderful sentiment. And that brings me back to Sylvia Earle, who is such a champion of Blue Hope Spaces. So she's the champion of ocean conservation, and talks about, the hope that we still must carry. And then I guess in the animal kingdom, I think of Jane Goodall, who's also that spirit of hope and just like never gives up, that persistence, dedicated her whole life. And how the importance of just like one individual, as well as what you just said about each of us. It takes all of us. It's a community effort. It's not just the experts, not just you folk in the room who have dedicated your lives to this, but it's really the actions and behaviors of all of us. It's becoming a more interconnected community. So Jen, I don't know, I already asked you for final remarks, but I didn't have you answer about Indigenous communities, and didn't know if you had any other final things you wanted to say before we turn over to the next panel.
I think, yeah, well, we have had just in the last couple of years have developed a relationship with the Esalen tribe of Monterey County, which is, I think, one of the more exciting things that's happened here in the last couple of years. Hastings has been a field station, a site of
11:15.
It's been a site of research and education for 85 years. And, we know so much about this landscape, but somehow over the years, like the story of the people part of it wasn't emphasized as much as I feel like it should be. And so when I approach the work that we do here, it's about stewardship. And to me, that means, the wildlife and the ecosystem and all that stuff, but also like the cultural traditions and the history of this place as well. Because, people were an integral part of this landscape for thousands and thousands of years before colonization. And so I think it's important to take all of that into account. And so I'm super excited that we've sort of built this relationship with the Esalen tribe. I see that Jana and Tom Nason are on this webinar. And it's just been a really incredible partnership. And we've got an archaeology project that's going to start their second year of field work this year that I think has been really valuable for all of us. And so just really looking forward to like improving and building upon that relationship in the future. And then I guess my final thought is just that idea of stewardship, and that, when we think about the world around us, there's a lot of stories that aren't being told from the human perspective, as well as, animals and plants and all of that as well. So I think it's important to realize that, the nature is more complex than, just a collection of plants and animals, and there's history there as well. So that's it.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists. We are so excited for having you participate this morning and kicking off our panel, our series of panels. We're going to invite our next panel to come forward. And so this will be the panel on fire, followed by the panel on water. So please put your praise in the chat and put your hands together for our panelists. Thank you so much. We are delighted and hope we can see everyone at Garland this afternoon, and just every day, make every day your commitment to furthering deeper connections in the community and relationships with wildlife. So thank you all so much. We're going to turn the panel now over to Abby Bean, who is our Executive Director for Carmel River Watershed Conservancy. Thank you.
Abby, I think your microphone is off.
Okay, I have it on now. Sorry, I was trying to be quiet, but everybody gets spotlighted when I start, right?
Yeah, you're good to go, Abby.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're ready to start, Ella?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to California Wildlife Day 2022. And thank you so much for joining our online session. We hope to see you at Garland Ranch Regional Park this afternoon for the nature walks and other activities. As Marie said, I'm the executive director of the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy, and really grateful to have our panelists here today and the audience joining us. So our next panel will focus on a very important topic for our area and really the entire Western US, which is creating fire-safe communities. And during this panel, we'll discuss creating fire-safe spaces for both private property and in wildland areas. Our three panelists are, well, the first of our three panelists is a licensed landscape contractor, Pam Bursler, of the Green Gardens Group, which is an award-winning EPA WaterSense professional certifying organization. And she'll discuss firescaping at residential and commercial properties. Alex Michelle is also here of the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association, who will discuss strategies for managing fuels in wildlands. And finally, Chanel Keller, who is an EMT firefighter with Midcoast Fire and works with the Esalen tribe. And she'll discuss cultural burning, which is another fuel management strategy, as well as her own experience with local fires. We'll also hear about wildfires versus prescribed burn impacts to wildlife, which should be a really interesting topic. I should also mention that there are plenty of other ways to create fire-safe communities, which we won't have time to discuss today, but those include technology like alert wildfire cameras, which we've started installing in Carmel Valley in particular, becoming a fire-wise community. We have several in Carmel Valley here. Animal grazing, home hardening practices, and other strategies. You can get in touch with the Fire Safe Council for Monterey County or the Monterey County Fire for more information on some of these programs. So please, if you weren't in the last panel, you may not know to type your questions into the chat, and we'll have some time at the end for a robust Q&A period with our three panelists to close out the session. So with that, I will let Pamela take it away with our first conversation, which is about firescaping. And perfect, we can see your screen, Pam.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm quite excited about sharing some of these strategies for creating utilizing landscape to create a more fire-safe community. I just want to start by putting everything into perspective, and that is that we look at all landscaping as essentially trying to recreate or mimic a balanced watershed. And a balanced watershed is really what creates a fire-safe community, because the cycles of, especially the cycle of water, really contributes tremendously to creating a sort of fire appropriate, or the appropriate use of fire within the landscape. So what that means is we are going to try to mimic that balanced watershed in which water is gathered by plants and put into soil and stored in soil, and then returned to the atmosphere as water vapor by plant materials. So having plants is a really, really, really important part of creating a fire-safe community. And the trend toward eliminating plants for water conservation or other reasons, even for fire-safe reasons, essentially eliminating plants in areas, is actually something that's detrimental to the overall performance of a landscape and therefore its fire resilience. So the things that we do in order to make our individual landscapes behave like mini watersheds is we apply 4 principles. And the 4 principles are: we grow healthy living soil that acts like a sponge. And I want you just to think about a sponge for a second. When you have a wet sponge and you wring it out, is it dry? No, it's not. It's because it's holding on to water. Even when you've gotten rid of most of the water, there's still moisture. And at the same time, when there's a water that you put into the sponge, if you watch how it comes out of the bottom of the sponge, you'll find that it's coming out at a different pace. So the sponge actually regulates water even when there's too much. And this is really important for us to be thinking about in the sort of fire cycle of burn, denuding landscape, and then having just soil that is subject to erosion and so forth. If we have a soil sponge, things begin to behave differently. So number 1, create healthy living soil that acts like a sponge. Number 2, we select climate appropriate plants. So those are plants that are adapted to our climate, that's local native plants, essentially. There are others from other parts of the world that do work in our landscapes because they are adapted to a Mediterranean climate, but we have a drier climate than most Mediterranean, actually than all the Mediterranean places. And we have other factors that make it really unique. So if you can select California native plants, that's the best way to go. And of course, it has all the other multiple benefits that we get from having that. The third thing is we passively capture rainwater in the soil. This is really crucial. We have a sponge, we put water in it. Look, in California, and I'm talking about all of California, Central Coast, Southern California, inland, at the beach, wherever you might be, we get plenty of water for that environment from the sky, free. What we don't do is hold it in our soil. And that is really, that's the most important thing. We have to really completely change the way we have a relationship with water that's coming from the sky. We've got to hold it in our soils. And then the fourth thing is we use highly efficient irrigation, but only when necessary. And the key here in terms of fire is when we're over irrigating, we're actually pushing plants to perform in a way that is not a natural way. They grow too fast. They are weak in their structure, and therefore they're much more vulnerable in times of fire. So when we talk about firescaping, we're not talking about any kind of aesthetic sacrifice whatsoever. Firescaping is a general design consideration that we're going to put into the context of the watershed approach. So it should not change the design in any way. And the number one thing is going to be soil that acts like a sponge. Many studies are being done about, why do some places burn much hotter and more intense than other places? What's going on? Is it just fuel? What is it? Well, the thing that really makes the difference we found is making the difference in these studies is soil moisture. Soil moisture is critical. We need to create it. That means we have to capture and hold on to rainwater as well. Planting with natives, of course, and then doing something called managing the green water zone. So essentially, this is growing plants that we are nurturing their roots much more than we are nurturing what we see above ground. So we are trying to create a system that is root filled, many, many, many different roots, a huge diversity of root structure in the soil. And this is not only going to sort of re-engineer the soil to become a sponge, but it also creates this giant water reservoir that's in the soil. And that's called the green water zone. It's the soil that is in it's the moisture that is in the root zone of plants. And this is the most critical water, fresh water on the planet. So there's all that, and that'll be, I guess, the next panel. But in terms of fire safety, this is the critical soil moisture that we need to create. So I want to just talk very quickly about protecting structures. 60 to 90% of homes are burned because of embers flying. And so that means that we have to do a couple things. First thing is we concentrate on reducing fuel, but it needs to be in particular areas. I'll talk about that in a second. Disrupting interrupting the path of fire is also critical, and increasing firefighter accessibility. So these are all key considerations in our design. Then we have design considerations right on the structure. So selecting better roof materials that are low combustible choices. So making sure that we are taking that into consideration. It's actually super important. Boxing in eaves. When the eaves are open, they create a place for embers to be able to take root, and then we get fire on the roof, and that's pretty much the end. So closing in your soffits is an important thing. Putting in gutter guards, really super important. This also keeps embers from falling into debris that might inadvertently be in your gutters, because you're not cleaning them all the time, and we've got a lot of trees that drop litter into the gutters or blow litter into the gutters. So super important. Covering vents with screens, another very, very important thing to be doing in order to, again, keep those embers from getting into places that are inaccessible. The fire gets going, and by the time it's started, it's just too difficult to manage. Your siding, making better choices on what the envelope of the home is, choosing stone and stucco, materials that are less flammable. There are certain siding, especially old siding, that is super flammable. You want to be conscious of this and make choices about removing that. So this is a really big one, because this is where your building envelope sort of intersects with the landscape. You want to avoid allowing wood fences or structures to touch the home. And that's because the wood can begin to burn, and then that fire is just transmitted right to the residents. Also, be careful about the storage of wood. So, you don't want it stored next to the home, under eaves, under, and we do this without thinking about it, cleaning up, making sure that we don't have any flammable materials. How many people have stored, that bucket of paint? It's in a crawl space and you're not really thinking about it. Well, guess what? That is a fire hazard. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to just talking about the landscape itself. We generally think about landscaping and fuel modification in 3 particular zones. So, but an overarching rule, if you would, to observe is to avoid fire ladders. And this is a little bit of this is definitely a design consideration, because many times when we do designs, we try to create this sort of head, shoulders, knees, and toes, we call it, right? So that we have a unified look of plant material. Maybe we are trying to capture views or focus attention into a particular area. And so we use this multi-level planting. And we can still do that. We just need to be more cognizant of how those plants are interacting with each other. And so part of this is managing the heights and the planting distance of plants. I think one of the things that I see a lot in landscape designs that are not fire safe is, I'm not even going to call it overplanting, it's inappropriate planting. So it's not taking into consideration the actual structure of the plant. How large does this plant get? We're putting plants that get 5-6 foot in diameter, 3 feet apart. And that's because we cannot envision that a small plant is going to grow. And that is a big challenge. So we want to be really cognizant of these fire ladders. We want to make sure that we have at least 6 feet of height off the ground for most for the canopy of most small trees. And then when we get to larger trees, we want to make sure that we have a distance off the ground that's at least 1/3 of the height of the tree. And that takes planning and thinking about it really from a very young age, and managing the shape of that tree. Now, I just want to be clear that this does not mean that we are constantly pruning trees, because when we get into that, which actually is what's kind of happening, is that we're constantly pruning trees and large shrubs because we didn't plan well. And as a result, we end up taking too much of that canopy. What we are actually doing is we are creating weak trees. And so when we take canopy off those trees, we reduce the resilience because we reduce the interaction with the soil. and the microbial community in the soil. And as a result, we've actually created a situation where that tree is not just not optimally growing, but is actually weak and is enticing to either pathogens, microbial pathogens or fungal pathogens, and also to insects. And so we kind of create that weakness, and so we need to really be thinking about this and quite conscious. So in the first zone, which is ground zero out to against the building out about 5 feet, and in some areas it's going to be even more than that, but generally 5, maybe as much as 10 feet. We really don't want to have any combustible material here. So this is a lot of ground cover. We lift all the tree skirts up. We want them up, again, a third of the height of the tree. We eliminate dead wood. Yes, that's a consideration for animals. There are times we want to have snags and other dead wood as a resource for fauna, but not in this 0 to 5 or 0 to 10 area. We want to lift up those tree skirts. And we have pathways that are in this area that are non-combustible. So decomposed granite, gravel, that sort of thing. And we make sure that we are capturing rainwater in this area. So this is really, really important. And it's a little bit in conflict with some of the advice about the placement of rainwater catchment being at least 10 feet from buildings. What we are trying to do here is we capture rainwater, but in very shallow depressions. So there's a whole thing about that, but we definitely want to make sure that we are holding rainwater in those areas. Utilizing stone and concrete walkways, steps and patios, again, a lot of gravel, but just in this area. And it's really a judicious use of rock, because remember, whenever we use rock in our landscapes or hard surface, first of all, we want to make sure it continues to be permeable, so it has gaps in it. It's not one giant solid concrete area. But every time we use rock or one of these materials that's impermeable or is not a living material, we are heating up the environment. And so that has cascading effects. I think one of the things for us just to remember is that every action that we take is going to have some kind of compounding effect. It's either going to be a positive compounding effect or it's going to be a negative compounding effect. So we need to be mindful that we are making choices that have positive compounding effects. That means if we're using rock in this area, it's a judicious use. It's only in particular areas for a particular reason. Utilizing low ground covers is a really great way to kind of soften in between pavers and also keep everything permeable, and again, capturing and holding rainwater. We also may want to think about having backup water supplies. So this is an opportunity for us to capture rainwater in a more active device, and that depends on your local codes, but also just whether or not you have the room to do that. In this area in particular, consider doing a natural lawn, which is a polyculture lawn. So instead of, again, a monoculture is a weak thing. And so when we have monoculture lawn of all one species of grass, we've basically created an incredibly water dependent and other resource dependent creature that is also fire susceptible because it doesn't have deep roots, etc. If we create a polyculture, we have all these multiple benefits that we create for the environment, in addition to creating a much more diverse root system that holds on to more water and is therefore more resilient in the face of fire. In dry winters, we want to make sure that we have a regular irrigation. Now, proper irrigation is not over irrigation. So again, when we over irrigate, we weaken. We want to make sure we're just maintaining soil moisture. All right, so then in between 5 and 30 feet, we have another zone, zone 2, and this is where we really don't want to have any dead vegetation for a very long time. We can manage that dead vegetation, because I know we sometimes want to have seed heads and so forth that we preserve, but this requires management. If you are someone who is managing for wildlife, it really requires being on top of it. Grass is kept relatively short, 4 to 6 inches. Trees, again, are limbed up, and we have spacing between shrubs. this is an excellent place to have our fire breaks. So these are structures that are mostly something that is not flammable, that creates a fire break so that fire can't just run up, run up hillsides, etc. We plant in beds with pathways between. So instead of just one massive planting, we actually begin to think about how do we well, first of all, how do we group plants by their water requirements and maybe utilize pathways as a means of not only reducing the amount of vegetation, but also creating the accessibility to get to those various areas. And again, we want to hold on to rainwater in this area as well. And it's really important to hold on to the rainwater in the soil so that we avoid erosion. I know it kind of doesn't seem, it's almost unintuitive, but when we have living roots in the soil, not only do we reduce the amount of water that's required by that landscape, so the more roots we have, the less water the landscape requires, but we also improve the soil holding capacity so that it does not move when it gets wet. And even if the vegetation on top is removed, if we are able to have that root structure, we really do a lot to reducing erosion and catastrophic erosion. I'm sorry, yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We'll just have to have you wrap up in just a minute here.
Yes,
Sorry about that. I know.
I'm basically done. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
I didn't set my line. That's okay. So also consider removing flammable trees, replace with better options. Again, healthy living soil. When you select plants, make sure they are not invasive. Look at the Cal IPC website to make sure. Here's a big deal. Mulch. It should be green-brown mulch. It should be living, smaller than 1.5 inches so that it decomposes and creates soil, but avoid all these. No gorilla hair, walk-on bark, rubber mulch, which is actually explosive, and your dyed mulches. Remove the debris in your gutters, avoid gas-powered machinery, and manage your brush clearance with animal integration, which improves water holding capacity. If fire's on the horizon, think about using your redundant irrigation, turn off your gas lines, and leave gates open so that the firefighters can access your property. All right, that's it. You can download a copy of our WaterWise guidebook at our website, Green Gardens Group, and that is all.
Thank you so much, Pam. I appreciate it. It was so much good information, and I'm sorry the time goes so fast.
It's good. Thank you for letting me know.
We'll post the slides too to our website, and we'll keep putting that in the chat so that people can, access the information after this session. There's a couple really great questions in the chat too, Pam, if you want to check it out and see if you want to provide some answers. That way we can get Alex going, and I can share your presentation for you, Alex.
Great. Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Okay. All right. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right, just let me know when to advance.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll start off by saying hi. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here. Oh, my screen is doing something weird. Are you guys seeing me?
We can still hear you. Yeah.
Hear me on your end? Okay. Well, if you can still hear me, that's good. I can't see you guys anymore, but I'll keep talking. Yeah, so I'm excited to share about prescribed burning on the Central Coast with you guys. Go ahead and change slides. So first off, a quick intro, a little bit about me. I went to school for landscape architecture initially. And when I was there, I was learning how concepts and landscape are working on paper and a computer, but didn't really know how to tie them to like a real life setting in the landscape. So I started working on Cal Poly's Swanton Pacific Ranch in Davenport, doing cattle ranching of all things. And that was an amazing opportunity that really helped me connect concepts I was learning to the landscape. Fast forward, I stayed in classes, involved in internship, kept working there all throughout college. And ended up doing some fire and forestry work there too. And that kind of just grew a love for large scale land stewardship. And after college, I started working on a regenerative agriculture ranch in Pescadero, also doing cattle ranching. And that's where I started volunteering with the CCPBA, the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association. So go ahead and change slides. Okay, it's so weird. I can't see you guys. Okay. So what is prescribed fire? I'm still learning as I go. I'm very new to it, but I'm learning a lot, and it's a really amazing tool. So prescribed burning is the use of plant-controlled fire on a landscape with specific predetermined goals and objectives. So the way I've seen it, especially coming from a design background, so to speak, is like, I'll start off by saying I was initially interested in suppression fire, so like wildland firefighting. And when I learned about prescribed fire, I was like, oh, this is like merging design and fire in some really cool way where you're stewarding the land and everything is designed and controlled and intentional with goals in mind. And it really attracted me. So change slides. It's not a new concept by any means. Indigenous peoples have been using fire as a tool for thousands of years. And it's been documented that some tribes would set up home sites in like a river valley, for example, and set up a home site on one side of the valley. And then the year after, switch sides, crossing the river and burn what they were just on. And then the year after that, or a certain time, switch sides again, burning what they were just on. And as they would exit or leave to new places, oftentimes they would also burn as they went. And if you think about fire, without perfect control lines, it's not like it would stop in a really distinct setting. It would keep going until it went out on its own. And then if you think about lightning strikes, it's not like there were housing developments and firefighters that would rush to put the fire out. These fires would burn and were frequent and would burn large portions of landscape. So actually California evolved and adapted to be known as pyroecological, to have pyroecological regions. Sorry, I'm just trying to.
Okay, I changed the slide too.
Okay. Oh, and I'll just say, so those plant communities evolved with fire regimes, and they now need like some form of disturbance to thrive. And I'll just say quickly on that too, some local tribes that we're working with are the Amamutsin and the Esalen tribes, doing really great work. So it's exciting. Okay, so common goals of prescribed fire. Fuel reduction is one that everyone I think is familiar with. Sorry. I'm trying to look at my presentation from my phone. It's so weird. Yeah, fuel reduction is one that everyone's familiar with. So whether that's making room to promote other species and getting rid of invasives. Honestly, the way I kind of see it is like the forest or any landscape kind of builds up material and kind of gets clogged over time, kind of like the pores on your skin or like your scalp. And it's kind of gross to think of it that way, but that's how I think of it. And if you don't clear it out somehow, cleanse it, it's just going to build up over time to the point where it can't breathe. And so fuel reduction through fire is a really great way of doing that, and just cleaning everything out, giving other species a chance to like start and grow. So so along with that ecological improvement is increasing forage production, which is great for wildlife, including pollinators, because then you get strong wildflower populations coming up, and forage production as well. So whether that be for wildlife or grazing species like livestock, cattle, sheep, goats, improving rangeland forage and forage in forests is shown to like increase protein in plants and palatability, which means it's easier to digest. So animals love it. You'll often see a lot of deer and just animals out grazing right after wildfires, after that first shot of rain when everything's fresh and green. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what is a prescribed burn association? So a prescribed burn association, also known as PBA, a PBA is a community-based mutual aid network that helps private landowners put good fire on the land. So this is neighbors helping neighbors, implementing burns by providing labor, skills, and it's really like an all hands on deck approach that we try to work with. I honestly see it as kind of like a branding. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with cattle brandings, but it's like you call your neighbors over, they help you get the work done. You're all working together, you're feeding each other, and then maybe next weekend you're on someone else's land helping them. And we really want to mimic that model with prescribed burn associations because it helps build resiliency and capacity in the community itself. And then the prescribed burn association can help with kind of like the oversight, can help with planning and organization and provide additional prescribed fire equipment like the yellow Nomex that you see or drip torches, as well as specialized expertise like burn bosses. And you can find your local PBA at the calpba.org website, which is a great website. There's a great map on there that has all the counties and kind of shows like jurisdictions of PBAs. Okay, and then next slide.
Yep, I think this is your last one maybe. And
yeah, sorry.
Yep, or there's two more.
Yeah.
That's how to get involved.
Okay, yeah. So CCPBA started in 2019, and that's the PBA that's local to you if you're watching from Carmel, Santa Cruz, or Monterey, Santa Cruz, Monterey, or San Benito. Our network is made up of over 400 people, and this includes ranchers, researchers, tribes, foresters, firefighters, other agencies, land trusts, and people that are just curious and wanting to become educated in prescribed fire. Recent projects we've done were burns on the Watsonville Slough for grassland restoration, the Santa Lucia Conservancy to help promote rangeland species as well and keep from other brush species from encroaching. And then in October, some of us got to go up to the Klamath Treks in the Trinity National Forest. Treks is a prescribed fire training exchange. So I can't see the screen, but that top right-hand picture where with all of us standing, fire in the background. We got to work with the Karuk tribe, which was an awesome experience. And just, we all learned a ton, and it was like a week-long intensive. They actually did 7 weeks. And that was a great opportunity as well. And then we've also done pile burn workshops in Bonnie Doon, Elkhorn Slough, and Piscinas, focusing on wildfire protection, eucalyptus removal, and biochar production. And then some things to look forward to with the PBA are we are welcoming 4 Good Fire tribal apprentices, which we're super excited about. We're working with the Amamutsin and the Esalen tribes. And basically we'll be providing resources for them to learn and train about cultural fire. We realize it's not our place to teach, so we want to give them access to that by providing those resources. And then we'll also be training with them on burns and the burn planning process, hoping that they'll take leadership roles in these processes, and then also develop their own education. So we'll, send them to classes and things like that. And then we're also going to have a Central Coast Treks training exchange in the spring of 2023. And then other trainings to look forward to, and burns are like basic firefighter trainings, firelighter trainings, home hardening workshops, pile burn workshops. Yeah. And then next slide, last slide.
Yep, I put up the last slide. Thanks, Alex. We just got one more minute here.
Yeah, so I really encourage you all to get connected with your local PBA, wherever that is. Again, the Cal PBA website is a great place to do that and find out who is doing prescribed fire in your area. And yeah, if you guys are interested, if anyone is interested in getting connected with the Central Coast PBA, you can email me. That email should be on there. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. I really appreciate that. Again, we will post these slides and all this information and video after California Wildlife Day. And so I'll turn it over to Chanel, our last panelist, here to talk a little bit more about prescribed burns, about cultural burns, and the tribes. This should be really interesting, kind of piggybacking off the last presentation. And thank you, Pam, for answering the Q&A too. So if anyone wants to take a look at the Q&A box, those questions are answered. Okay, we can see your screen. Thanks, Chanel.
Thank you. Selekia Satsa Eniowis, Mishishmap Chanel. I wanted to introduce myself in our Esalen language of Walel. I want to first and foremost thank my ancestors living on this land and continuing to live on this land. Despite the hardships they have faced, by growing up here, I was allowed to learn the ecology and the ecology of the land. And I think this is what has given me my perspective on cultural fire. So I am a tribal member of the Esalen tribe. I am also an apprentice to Chief Tom Little Bear Nason of the Esalen tribe of Big Sur. Tom Little Bear has worked 47 fire seasons and has traditional ecological knowledge from a lifetime. His knowledge was passed down from his great-grandparents to his grandparents to him. He also has experience in fire mimicry, cultural fire skills, along with a plethora of other experience. I am currently a student in forestry, which is why I don't call myself an expert. I feel like you can continue to learn and become flexible in your knowledge when you always consider yourself a student. I have 2 associate's degrees from Monterey Peninsula College, one in ornamental horticulture and one in fire science. I feel like this has kind of like broadened my perspective on the environment, because I've seen it from, a monetary level to like what we can benefit from it, all the way to like the biology of the land and what benefits from it. I have been a volunteer firefighter with Mid-Coast Fire Brigade for 5 years. So I also come from, a fire suppression background, which was really counterintuitive when I began working in cultural fire, because for so long I was taught, to put water on fire. So actually starting the fire was a weird feeling for me. What is cultural fire? Cultural fire to me is a tribal-led traditional ecological knowledge of intentional burning of the ancestral lands that can benefit the ecosystems and the people that share the land. Cultural burning means using fire as a tool to shape the environment by reducing the fuel loads, creating paths, regenerating the chaparral flora, and allowing natural fire regime to take place under the supervision due to the wildland urban interface. Now I say, set a natural fire regime under supervision because in a lot of these places we have wildland urban interface, which means that we have communities that are placed closely to these wildland areas. Cultural fire is more than this. It allows a tribe to connect with the ancestors and ancestral lands in a meaningful way. The act of familiarization with the lands, the flora, the fauna, and how they regenerate after a fire provides traditional ecological knowledge that can only be gained through experience. By regenerating flora, the tribe can gather traditional foods, learn to prepare them, and make healthy traditional foods that are accessible to their own families. Recently, I had gone gathering, and I had witnessed the connection with not only the food source and the land, but also a connection and oneness with my own tribe. By gathering together, we were able to bond, and we became a network of love and trust that provided like a sense of wholeness that I feel like is incredibly difficult in these times, especially with COVID. But being outside in nature and learning the ecology of like, oh, are the bay trees going off yet? Should we go collect them? And like finding those little, niches, those good spots, just brought so much joy to us. These are some pictures of my first cultural burn. As you can tell, I was really excited about it. I met a lot of friends and I learned a lot about the ecology of the Yurok lands. So while working with the Cultural Fire Management Council on their cultural burn, I was able to witness firsthand the benefits of cultural burning. The Yurok, the Hupa, and the Karuk tribe use fire to regenerate the hazelnut, which is prized for its basketry usage. The basketry of the Yurok is of extreme importance, and by burning, they're preserving cultural heritage, providing fuel break to the community, regenerating the land, reducing the impact of invasive species like the blackberry, or they also had pampas grass there that we were burning. They are also creating habitat for the large game to access and hunt. One of the things that I had learned about in my recent experience with them was that they were trying to entice the Roosevelt elk to enter back into the area. Traditionally, it was found there and consumed by the tribes, and so they're hoping that as they continue burning and providing habitat, that they can entice the elk down into their area. So for me, cultural fire means being able to use practical traditional ecological knowledge, and this knowledge had been passed down for generations. Our ancestors, they lived on this land for thousands upon thousands of years, and they learned how to manage this land and utilize the bounty of it. And their knowledge is invaluable. Becoming a tribal burner has brought me joy, friends, physical health, a sense of purpose, and jobs. The benefit to the ecosystem is the icing on the cake. Currently, our tribe is implementing a fuels reduction program. It's in the works, and we're actually putting our feet to the ground with it currently. We will begin putting good fire to the ground in 2023, working with a lot of wonderful organizations. I believe we're also working with the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association. I look forward to that. We will be burning to create a fire break, using fire mimicry to preserve sensitive species, regenerating areas of the chaparral that benefit from burns, diversifying the ecosystem by removing invasive species, and using the fire to protect ancestral sites. Many people don't know this, but during the Colorado fire, we had learned that some of our ancestral sites were actually damaged. And in the future, we plan to protect these lands and our ancestral history with cultural burning. There are more benefits to cultural burns than what I had listed earlier. It allows for a traditional ecological knowledge intertribally. When I was working with the Yurok, they were particularly Elizabeth Azuz. She's so intelligent. She spent a long time communicating with me about her own ecology and and this kind of traditional ecological knowledge exchange, I felt just helped us grow and connect as Indigenous peoples and made us very prideful of our areas. Not only this, it provides jobs to tribal and non-tribal members. It benefits the ecosystem, the neighboring cities by creating fuel breaks. It preserves the cultural knowledge, and it is a means of maintaining and protecting previously unmanaged areas that are fire prone. Provides habitat, increases biodiversity, creates a food source. So for instance, the deer, it is only able to consume food that it can reach. And one of the plants it likes to consume is something called ceanothus. And when ceanothus is unmanaged and is allowed to grow, it'll grow almost tree-like. And when it gets to a certain height, the deer can no longer access it. So by burning it, we're bringing it back down and letting it regenerate and letting it become a height that the deers can actually access it. There is minimal wildlife loss as the animals are attuned to fire regimes and are fire adapted due to the historical adaptation. They have been used to lightning fires. They have been adapted to indigenous fires. You know, our people were thought to have existed for 30,000 years. So these animals know what to expect. In the event that that game does pass, it will actually increase the fitness of the existing healthy individuals. I discussed with Tom a little bit about this, as I'm not too familiar with, you know, wildlife loss on these wildland fires. But he did tell me that intentional burning reduces the risks of death because we know what is present there. We have game cameras. We know like their life cycle and when they're nesting. So having knowledge of the nesting sites of the animals that exist within that area, we can work around them, not against them. There's also particular periods that we do not burn. From March to June 28th. There are fledglings present, so we do not burn during those periods of time. As a fire suppression firefighter, I believe that fire suppression is a second line of defense. Fire suppression is utilized when human lives or cultural sites are at risk. I believe that this should not be our only line of defense, and we need to move forward and look towards prevention. As a volunteer firefighter, I feel that we should not be responsible to fight conflagrations that are unmanageable. With the droughts and climate change and the existing fuel loads, witnessing the Colorado fire in January with everything still wet with dew was absolutely insane. I always thought that, you know, fires are summer and fall, and that's when we have staff from CAL FIRE to help us respond. So during this Colorado fire, we actually had to call in resources from all over the county and further. The Colorado fire was an example of how even when you try to do everything right, fire can escape us, and having resources available year round is the new norm. Our goal will always be first and foremost protecting human lives. But if homeowners do not do their fire clearance, it puts us at greater risk. Education about wildland urban interface needs to be a part of the welcome package when new neighbors enter into a wildland urban area and community. So my experience with fire suppression has inspired me to look to the future of forestry and forest health. I'm still in my first year at Cal Poly. I just finished up my my quarter a couple of days ago. And the more that I'm in class, the more that I see that they're pushing for traditional ecological knowledge and tribal-led cultural fires. There's a shift happening, and I'm very excited for it. I'm excited to actually manage lands instead of just responding to the fires. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
Thank you so much, Chanel. That was amazing, really fascinating too. So much information. There is a question in the chat, or in the Q&A box about areas that might be burning in 23. So I don't know if you want to try to respond to that there, and then we'll start setting up for the next panel with our president from the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy, Lauren Latondra, who'll be talking about water and wildlife, and has a few panelists. So we're looking forward to that. Can you see it there, Chanel? If there are any anything planned for, I think 2023, I think that's the question.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So we're currently working with the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association. And I'm actually about to have my first meeting with Jared Childress, communicating with him about, you know, our plan for it. And yeah, so currently right now we're working with the fuels reduction program. So we're reducing the fuels manually so that we don't have a large conflagration. Our fires will be low intensity in nature, and we'll be working in smaller sections. So that's about all the knowledge I have on our future burns.
Okay. Great, I'll type that up too. Okay, Great. Well, thanks to everyone on this panel. We'll get this up on our website. We'll put it in the chat. Yes, really rich discussion. And then we'll turn it over to Lauren and his panel next.
My face is not up.
That happened to me too. Talk.
I guess I'm live here, so.
I think you can go ahead.
Okay. So greetings again. I'm the president of the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy and the host of this panel. I would like to open this panel on wildlife and water with a quote from the Water for Wildlife Foundation. Quote, across the West, native wildlife species and their habitats have been adversely affected by years of drought conditions across a vast span of our nation, unquote. Clean water is the lifeblood of wildlife and especially so for threatened and endangered species. If we can provide supplemental as well as permanent water sources for wildlife threatened with extinction, we can preserve their diversity and health. Our Carmel River watershed has suffered from many droughts or dry seasons, so our wildlife are particularly vulnerable if we cannot provide them with adequate water sources. This includes humans, which with the state's cease and desist order, we are also becoming a quote unquote threatened species. However, our community is responding with water supply projects such as the aquifer storage and recovery and groundwater replenishment, and perhaps with desalination. Those are huge projects, but there are much smaller steps that all of us Monterey Peninsula residents can take to ensure clean water for ourselves and to ensure that our wildlife receives their fair share. In addition to continuing to do a wonderful job of conserving water that you have been doing in the peninsula, you could do such things as install a water garden that includes fountains, ponds, bird baths, or any natural water source such as seasonal pools. You could become a certified backyard wildlife habitat, which use sustainable gardening practices to reduce human demands on water. You could store rainwater or well water during the wet season. For use during the drier months, you could create a pollination site on your property. And these are just some examples that you'll hear more from our panelists. So there are many other ways that you could help preserve our diverse wildlife, but enhancing their access to clean water at safe sites is one of the most helpful things you can do. And if you have questions that you want to ask, please put them on your Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. And the first will be Thomas Christensen from the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. And he has been working for years and years in the Carmel River watershed to preserve and restore the vegetation, especially in the watershed. So Thomas, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen here real quick. Let's see. Oh, I think I might have already been sharing it. Let's see here. There it is. So can everybody see the presentation?
No, we don't see it yet.
Okay, let me try again. I'll say share. Do you see it now?
Looks great.
Okay, great, thanks. So yeah, my name is Thomas Christensen and I work for the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. And today I just want to share with you a very short summary of water here on the peninsula, mostly focusing on the Carmel River, which is a huge part of the peninsula's supply and has gone through many different struggles to balance the community's use versus what wildlife needs on the Carmel River. So basically, we live in a Mediterranean climate and we get good water years and bad water years and water years in between. But on average, we get about 21.2 inches of rainfall in the San Clemente Dam area, which was removed in 2015, the dam, but we still measure rainfall up there. It's one of the longest rainfall records. But it can be really low. It can be, downwards of 10 inches in some years. And then in some years we can get, 40 inches, which are the, obviously the wet years. We're in many ways kind of unique here in this area because all of our water comes from local sources. We don't get water from the Central Valley or Sierra snowmelt. It's all which falls in the watershed, which is 255 square miles. You can see this black boundary, that's the Carmel River watershed. And it works its way through the tributaries and down into the main stem of the Carmel River. And then a lot of that water is stored in what they call the Carmel Valley alluvial aquifer. That's the sands and gravels below the Carmel River floodplain, where a lot of wells are sunk into those sands and gravels and extract water. The other place we get water is from the Seaside Groundwater Basin, which also stores water in the spaces between the sands and gravels in that area. And we try to use these two areas conjunctively, where you can actually take, when the river's really flowing high, you can inject water into Seaside Basin when there's plenty of water for people and wildlife, and then try to use that water in the Seaside Basin in the summer so that the Carmel River isn't pumped when it's really low in the summertime. So here's a little bit of what we see on the Carmel River. We have drought years and we have a stream bed that goes dry, partially because of lack of rainfall, but also because of groundwater extraction for the community, puts pressure on that limited resource in dry years. And then we have years where the Carmel River is really flowing strong when we get lots of atmospheric rivers or El Nino type events. And here's the San Clemente Dam in 1995 almost being overtopped when we had more than enough rain. So basically, on the peninsula, we have physical limitations to the water supply. We have this extreme annual and seasonal variability. We have good years and bad years. We have inadequate storage capacity. So what that really means is, even in a good rainfall year, the Los Padres Reservoir doesn't store that much water. It's roughly around 1,700 acre feet of water that it stores. And if you drive by some of these big reservoirs in the Sierras, those are on the order of 200,000 acre feet to 500,000 acre feet. So we have very little storage. One of those storage places is the Seaside Basin as well. And that's why what we're trying to focus on and utilize that as a storage resource versus trying to build a new reservoir on the Carmel River. You can see here in 2013 and even last year, in these drier years, this is at the Dampier. When we get into the middle of summer, there's such little flow that portions of the Carmel River goes dry, and that can put stress on the native riparian vegetation. You can see these cottonwoods and alders are losing their leaves. And this was a really big problem in the 70s and 80s along the lower Carmel River, which led to stream bank failures because the vegetation would die And then the river would come up in the winter time, and there was no roots holding the stream banks together, and there was large erosion events. You can see here in the 80s, there was lots of effort to protect these stream banks with native plantings. And here's just upstream of Schulte Bridge, which looks totally different now, but you can see that's just after they finished the design project. You know, Steelhead struggling in these dry conditions when pumping of water was much greater than it was today as far as for community use. So we have threatened species on the Carmel River. We have California red-legged frog listed as threatened in 1996, and steelhead listed as threatened in 1997. You can see a young man with an adult steelhead there on the Carmel River from back in the day. And sometimes people still fish for steelhead on the river, but minding the rules of California Department of Fish and Wildlife, it's catch and release only, and the rivers actually has to be flowing quite well for fishing days to be legal, and it's a very short season. There's also legal limitations. So basically what happened is the peninsula and Carmel Valley developed quicker than additional water supplies. So all these houses and small ranchettes were hooking up to the California American water system, and people were also putting in wells, and they were basically taking more water than the peninsula could than the river could deliver. So the Steelhead Association and several private property owners and the Sierra Club brought this to the attention of the State Water Resources Control Board, who basically said, yes, you're right. The community is taking more water, and Cal-Am is taking more water than they have a legal right to. And so there was this Order 9510 requiring Cal-Am to find a new source of water. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and go over some of that background. But in the meantime, with the search for new water supply, there's also this program which I work in, which is called the Water Districts Mitigation Program. It's also could be called an environmental protection program, and it's really designed to offset the impacts to the surrounding environment by water extraction. And this mitigation program actually started before the state got involved, because it was based on the water allocation EIR that the Water District did in 1990, which basically said, if you're going to take X amount of water out of the Carmel Valley alluvial aquifer and seaside area, you need to mitigate for that. So that mitigation involves water conservation. That's why houses are inspected for low flow fixtures and converted as they sell. And then also there's steelhead rescue. When the river is drying, the Water District goes in on the main stem of the Carmel River and rescues young of the year steelhead. We take them and we rear them in the facility, and there's also stream restoration work. So here's some steelhead spawning on the Carmel River. And you can see from this graph here that, you know, there's good years for adult steelhead and bad years as well. And many of these bad years are associated with drought years where there's just not enough flow for fish passage or attraction at the lagoon. And so it's, you know, as we see, everything is tied together. The community's water use impacts the river, but the actual poor rainfall events impact the river as well. So here's some district staff and seasonal workers helping rescue juvenile steelhead when the river starts to get low, usually around less than 5 CFS. Last year, the district rescued almost 8,000 juvenile fish. And since the program began in 1989, just over 470,000 young in the year have been rescued. And they use this a little electrical backpack shocker that kind of turns the fish and stuns them for a second. They're netted and put in a truck and then taken up to the Sleepy Hollow rearing facility. Here's another drying reach just below de Dampierre, showing more rescue efforts. It's really dramatic to see, you know, a dry stream bed with one little pool left with steelhead in. It's very it's hard to imagine, but when you see it, it really impacts you, and you realize how little water there is during the summertime for steelhead sometimes. This is the Sleepy Hollow rearing facility where these young fish are brought and they're put in this artificial channel just to the side of the Carmel River. So a little bit of water is pumped from the river, put in this channel. Fish are fed and cared for. They're tagged. Genetic samples are taken and given to NOAA Fisheries. And then when the river connects again to the lagoon in the wintertime with high flows, they're released back into the actual river again to complete their life cycle and hopefully go to the ocean and then come back to spawn. Here's also some work that the Water District does as part of the mitigation program. Back in the 70s and 80s, the stream banks really started falling apart because the water table was drawn down associated with community water use. The vegetation died because the water was brought below the root zone. So the district started putting in these restoration projects and irrigating willow plantings to kind of bring back the native riparian corridor, which protects banks, but also provides habitat and shade for steelhead and red-legged frog and songbirds and other species that depend on a healthy riparian corridor. Well, here's another picture of Schulte, 1982, when it first started eroding and having problems, and then how it looks today after restoration in 2005.
1 minute, Thomas.
Okay, and I think I'm pretty close. So what does the new water supply look like? I'm gonna just do this real quick. There is some good news. It's been a long time, but through planning and lots of community support, we now have aquifer storage and recovery, which is a new water supply where high flows on the river are diverted to Seaside Basin to be used in the summertime, so the river's not pumped as hard. We have wastewater from the peninsula area and Salinas being cleaned to drinking water standards and injected in the Seaside Basin to be used later. And then pure water Monterey expansion. And then there's still a question whether or not the desal plant will be built, because nobody's sure if we totally need it. So ASR fills this gap, pure water Monterey fills the gap, and so does pure water expansion. You can see the bottom red line is kind of the demand of 2021. And the green is what comes from Carmel River, red comes from Seaside Basin. You can see conservation of the peninsula has really helped our water supply situation. We've gone from just about 15,000 acre feet of use back in the early 2000s down to around just under 10,000. Less water coming out of the Carmel River now because of pure water Monterey and ASR. This is the demand for water. In yellow is the projected demand, and this is the water supply in red with pure water Monterey expansion. So we at the district think that there'll be enough water till at least 2050 without desalination. This is where we are today with the water year. It's dry, so pray for rain. We're looking like water year 2015, looking like a dry year. And then in conclusion, the Water District manages, augments, and protects water resources for the benefit of the community and the environment. We carry out an environmental protection program, and we continue to pursue feasible water supply options like aquifer storage recovery and pure water Monterey. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And the next panelist will be Brian Lenev, past president of the Carmel River Steelhead Association. He has participated in dozens, if not hundreds, of fish rescues on the tributaries of the Carmel River. And he also probably knows more about steelhead in the Carmel River than anybody still alive. So I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Lauren. Hello, I am Brian Neve. Currently, I am the Conservation Chair for the Cardinal River Steelhead Association. I'm going to talk today about steelhead in general and the Cardinal River steelhead in particular. I don't have any slides, so I just go through a lot of facts that you really rapid fashion. Rainbow trout are really an amazing species. I say rainbow trout because steelhead are just a life form of rainbow trout. Rainbow trout belong to a family with most other salmon and trout. The salmon part of that family's significant characteristic is they are adjuvants, meaning they are born freshwater but spend most of their life in salt water, return to freshwater spawn. Most salmon die after they spawn. Rainbow trout are not adjuvants. They spend most of their life in freshwater and can spawn multiple times. A steelhead is a life form of rainbow trout that is adjuvant and migrates to the ocean and then returns to spawn, and steelhead do not die after they spawn. I said rainbow trout are amazing species. First amazing fact, a study in 1956 in Santa Cruz trapped the same female steelhead 3 years in a row, returning from the ocean to spawn. Another fact, some rainbow trout decide to migrate to the ocean, and when they hit salt water, they become what is known as a steelhead. 2 rainbow trout can spawn, and some of their offspring will go to the ocean and become steelhead. 2 steelhead can spawn, and some of their offspring will stay in freshwater all their life as a rainbow trout. There have been many documented events where steelhead and rainbow trout have spawned as a pair. One study in 2011 showed that 20 to 40% of steelhead genetics come from rainbow trout. This is a really great genetic adaptation because if something happens to a river and most rainbow trout die, there are steelhead in the ocean to come back and start the rainbow trout life cycle again. If we have poor ocean conditions and most steelhead were to die, some rainbow trout sometime in the future will head to sea and become steelhead. Or in the case of the Carmel River in the 1976 drought, when the river did not make it to the ocean for 4 consecutive seasons. The Carmel River Steelhead Association captured 100 smolt, which is a rainbow trout heading to the sea, raised them in saltwater tanks, spawned them, reduced 350,000 penguins back to the Carmel River, helped mitigating the loss of that drought. Another amazing fact, from what I can find out, a salmon, Chinook salmon can jump 7.8 feet, a coho salmon 7.8 feet, a sockeye salmon 6.5 feet, and a chum salmon only 1.7. The exceptional leader is a steelhead, which can jump 11.2 feet. Most salmon have a burst speed, a speed at what they are frightened of 11 to 16 miles an hour. Steelhead has a burst speed of 21 miles an hour. A steelhead found in Russia was 17 years old. We know this because fish have growth rings on their scales, just like the tree rings on a tree. It is facts like these that make steelhead an interesting fish to study and a great real prize sport fish. Now to the Carmel River genetic strain. I think everyone believes the steelhead and the Carmel River are not doing well compared to historic numbers, but that's hard to quantify. I have seen historic numbers ranging from 14,000 fish to 21,000 fish. A book called The Hattons and the Martins talked about the steelhead in the 1920s and stated the boys spared 1,300 fish one year. If they could have, which I doubt, spared 10% of the fish, that would have been a run of 13,000 fish in the 1920s. Actual numbers are much harder, but my own experiences matches what fish counts show. My father, as a young man in the 40s, late 30s and early 40s, said he could hook and hunt land 150 fish a year. When I was a young man in the 60s, I could hook and land 60 fish a year. My son never hooked a fish in the Carmel River. Fish counts at the old San Clemente Dam are the best we can do for current numbers, but even then, the early numbers at San Clemente Dam were still estimates. I have selected 2 10-year periods to compare. The dates of these periods might seem odd, but remember, historically, we only have a few records for a few years, and with droughts over the years in a short period of time, finding 2 10-year periods was hard to find. Between 1962 and 1971, there was a high estimate of 1,350 fish passed over San Clemente Dam, and a low estimate of 362 fish, with an average of 777 fish. Between 2002 and 2011, there was an actual high count of 642 fish passed over San Clemente, and a low of 95, with an average of only 364 fish, just half of what it was a couple of decades ago. It has been estimated that 50% of the steelhead spawn below Los Padres Dam. So the 60s run would have averaged 1,554 fish, and the 2000 run would have averaged 728 fish. A long ways from the minimum historic number of 14,000 fish. With so many fish spawning in the lower river, when they took out San Clemente Dam and its fish counter, we had no way of estimating what the run was on the Carmel. So the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District installed a fish weir below Highway 1 to count fish. Last year was the first year of operation. They counted a total of 120 fish in the weir, and they fished at 88% of the season. So the total run could have been larger, but probably less than 150 fish. This year, up until March 17th, the count was only 68 fish, with the weir operating 71% of the time. I think the mouth of the Carmel River may be closed for the season already, and so any lake fish will never get into the river. Will we ever again see runs reaching 14,000 fish? Never. We will never see a river again migrate across the valley, make braided channels, or have offspring habitat. We will never have the amount of water in the river once had. Remember now, I'm comparing before Europeans to now, not before my father's time to now. National Marine Fisheries listed steelhead as a federally threatened species in 1997, and their recovery plan will remove steelhead from the threatened species only if there's a sustainable run of 4,000 fish. CSA feels we only need a run of 2,000 fish. That's the bad news. Now the good news to allow you to go away with some hope. Since the American Rivers declared the puny Carmel River one of the 10 most endangered rivers in the nation, a lot has been done by a lot of people. 2 dams, the old Carmel River Dam built in 1883 and the San Clemente Dam built in 1921 have both been removed, allowing for better and faster access to the upper river. The peninsula now takes less than 4,000 acre-feet of water from the Carmel River, down from above 14,000 acre-feet at one time. 2 artichoke fields of production in my lifetime are gone. One is part of the California State Parks Carmel River State Beach, and one will be converted to a floodplain and causeway under Highway 1, which is the Big Sur Land Trust Carmel Free Project. 2 golf courses were recently moved. One will be a new housing project that should use less water than the golf course, and one is Regional Parks Palo Colorado Ranch, which will also be partially turned into a floodplain. Monterey Peninsula Water Management District has injected gravel at least twice to replace spawning gravel locked behind Los Padres Dam that will benefit steelhead. MPWMD and CRSA both have active programs to rescue fish stranded by rivers and creeks that dry every year. With MPWMD rearing a lot of those rescued fish in an offspring rearing facility and releasing them back to the river when the river runs again. Various organizations are taking out concrete roads across creeks and replacing them with bridges, allowing steelhead to migrate faster and easier. We are studying the Carmel River like never before. With dam removal being still new, a lot of agencies, including CSUMB, are studying what happens when a river when a dam is removed. National Marine Fisheries, in conjunction with the Water District, are using pit tags to study movements of fish from the mouth to above Los Padres Dam. CRSA is putting together using DNA to determine that fish rescues really do work and to understand where returning adults originate from. As I said, a lot of work by a lot of people. Earlier, I talked about the genetic strain of fish in the Carmel River. Around 95% of steelhead return to the river from where they were born. Over thousands of years, these fish adapt to conditions unique to their rivers. One of the adaptations of Carmel River fish is slightly warmer water. Steelhead are cold water fish and very sensitive to water temperatures, with sustained water over 74 degrees being lethal. With global warming, it is feared that rivers may warm up faster than steelhead can adapt. If this happens, one of my favorite dreams is the Carmel River steelhead will migrate north to Oregon and Washington, and those rivers will be repopulated with Carmel River fish. I would like to end with my favorite quote about the Carmel River. Steinbeck and Camry Rowe wrote, "The Carmel is a lovely little river. It isn't very long, but in its course, it has everything a river should have." We're all working to restore the Carmel River, but you have to realize restoration is a marathon, not a sprint. But if we all continue to pull together, maybe again we can say what Steinbeck wrote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Those are amazing facts that you just gave us, and I guess some hope at the end that you presented. The next panelist will be Professor Jennifer Duggan from Cal State University, Monterey Bay. She's a wildlife biologist and probably knows more fascinating facts about rodents than anybody I've ever met. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenny.
Thanks, Lauren. I'll start by sharing my screen here. Hopefully this works okay. Let's see. I have my little box of faces, I guess we'll put right there. Can you guys see my screen all right?
Yeah, we can see it, Jenny, but you're not in presentation mode, which is fine, but just letting you know.
Yeah, you can do full screen if you want. Yeah, there.
There we go. All right, so we have been hearing so far quite a bit about the Carmel River and wildlife relationships there. So I'm going to move upland and focus on terrestrial species. We know that we have these predictions with climate change for increased drought in California, as well as increased fire. And so we're interested in figuring out how wildlife, terrestrial wildlife in particular, will respond to these changes. So there have been some pretty cool studies done in the Central California area. One in particular was conducted at the Carrizo Plain National Monument that looked at food web dynamics and responses to prolonged drought. In one particular study, the researchers were monitoring more than 400 species at the Carrizo Plain, both before and then during drought. What they found was that the drought promoted the persistence of rare and small species by stressing the dominant large-bodied species in the food web. So in this food web, everything starts out when the drought kicks in, vegetation dries up, and that means fewer food resources for herbivores. So in this case, our herbivores are, well, many things, since they're looking at more than 400 species, but I'm focusing on the rodents. We have a large-bodied herbivore, which is that top picture, the giant kangaroo rat. And with that large body to be maintained, that species really struggles in the long term with prolonged droughts. When their populations start declining because of the struggle to gain enough food, smaller herbivores, like smaller species of kangaroo rats and things like the southern grasshopper mouse, they actually flourish. And so the result is a more species-rich area. You actually have more species doing well. So it's a little bit of a trade-off where you have this temporary decline in your large-bodied species. And in this case, it's actually an endangered species. But to balance that out, you get this increase in species richness. Now, of course, things actually travel up the food web. These decreased food resources continue to impact different species as you go higher and higher up the food chain. And so you also find really quite devastating effects on the top predators as well as they struggle to get enough food. So coyotes and hawks and owls, things like that. The lesson we take from this is that it's important, particularly for managers, to monitor the sensitive species that are higher on food chains through drought periods. But we also take from that it's important to support the conservation of larger areas of habitat, large reserves that provide kind of more extensive areas of food resources for these more sensitive species, the large-bodied species that are going to struggle during times of drought. Now, when we look at the wildlife we have locally, we see that they have really great adaptations to arid climates, and that helps their persistence through drought periods. So one example we see across many different types of animals, both amphibians and mammals, is the ability to estivate. Estivation is kind of like hibernation, but done during dry conditions. So an animal is able to drop its metabolism and go into kind of a sleep-like condition that requires a lot less energy, less food resources. So It's pretty amazing in amphibians. It's something like the ensatina that you see on the left. We normally think of amphibians as requiring water, but something like the ensatina is so adapted to our arid climate that it doesn't even return to water to reproduce. It just finds a slightly more moist place on land and it lays its eggs there. So really well adapted, and they can go into estivation underground or in kind of tucked in places in their habitat. And they can make it through these long periods of drought. It's really impressive. The same with ground squirrels and a number of species. Kind of an extra bonus to that ability to estivate is that it often takes wildlife species underground in burrows, and you don't really have to get too far underground before you're pretty well insulated from extreme temperatures above ground. And so you can actually survive wildfires pretty easily just by being underground. So estivation also helps that way. Now we also see estivation in our endangered California tiger salamander. This species is a little bit different. It actually does require water for breeding. So it is found in ponds, both natural and artificial, throughout Central California. One of the really big threats currently, though, to this species is that there has been an introduced species of salamander, the barred salamander, that also has moved into this range and is able to breed with the California tiger salamander. They can produce viable offspring, a hybrid, and the hybrids, kind of surprisingly, do really well. They grow faster than our native California tiger salamanders. They seem probably better to compete for food resources. And so they can outcompete the California tiger salamander fairly easily. Where the native tiger salamander does well, though, is that it can survive drought conditions better than the hybrid. When ponds dry out, it's not really an issue for the California tiger salamander. That's part of its normal life cycle, where it moves into upland habitats and then estivates in burrows for the dry season. And that gives that species a chance to survive. The hybrids don't really do well with prolonged drying out, and they actually end up dying. So estivation is kind of another adaptation for the win with our California tiger salamander here. And what we can then take from this is that, at least for managers, there can be strategies implemented to manage the water in ponds, especially what we see in artificial ponds, cattle ponds. People have started draining them at certain times of year to kind of extend the drying time and hopefully kill off the hybrid salamanders in those ponds. It's also really important, maybe for your everyday person who doesn't have a pond that they're managing, it's also important to conserve the upland habitats that the California tiger salamanders use. Not only those habitats, but the ground squirrel populations that are on them, maintaining these burrows, and the land that connects the pools to those upland habitats. So the tiger salamanders need to be able to move back and forth. And so us conserving those things is what will allow their persistence. Some wildlife species are just good at finding water. They're a little bit more mobile. So birds, bats, bears, all kinds of things start invading our yards during drought conditions because they're searching for water and we've got it. In some cases, this might be okay, especially with birds. We sometimes don't worry so much about them coming into our yards, and sometimes we're actively promoting it. And our bird baths can be very helpful for these species, particularly in their breeding seasons. But there are some negatives to having these artificial water sources for wildlife. Having standing water like that can bring species together in clusters that don't normally accumulate in this way. And it really increases the chance for spreading disease, We saw that this past year with salmonella outbreaks in birds, in bird baths. The pine siskin in particular was really negatively impacted by that particular outbreak. And then there's always the possibility that when you've got that water available for wildlife, that you're exposing them to extra dangers when they come in to kind of access that water. So not only might they encounter cars or other threats to their life just trying to get to the water, once they're there, there may be new types of predators that they're not used to, the big one being outdoor cats. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag, the whole idea of providing artificial water for wildlife. The lessons we take here are really that avoiding artificial water is usually preferable. If you do have a bird bath, and it's understandable, they are pretty fun to have, you really should make sure you clean it regularly. We do want to prevent the spread of disease. And you should do what you can to keep your yard safe for wildlife. So don't let your cat outdoors, or if you absolutely must, put a bell on its collar. So we have some best practices then to support wildlife. First of all, use water carefully, right? We always want to conserve and use water sustainably. If you are providing wildlife with water, as I just said a second ago, make sure you're keeping it clean and that you're providing a safe space for the wildlife. The next point, though, is probably even better. You could actually landscape your yard for wildlife using native vegetation. So instead of just providing this one artificial resource, actually provide the habitat needed by wildlife. And then, of course, not everybody can do that with a yard. If you can support natural habitats, support that conservation, as well as support the lands that allow wildlife access to them, so any kind of corridors for movement, that's really one of the very best things we can do to help our wildlife species really make it through the changes we are experiencing, the repeated droughts and the wildfires. And that's, I think, where I'll end. Sounds like I might be even under time, which is great.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. I think it's pretty clear that we have our own actions that will have a lot of effect on the ability of wildlife to survive the periodic droughts, and just the Mediterranean climate in general is probably a tough thing for many forms of wildlife. But there is certainly hope in each of your presentations, and for our wildlife being able to survive. And since the questions have been answered as we go here, I think there's one left that I'll check on. It was the first year of operation, I believe, of the Sleepy Hollow rearing facility.
Yeah,
Thomas?
yeah, I think he might have been talking about ASR, but ASR started roughly in the late 90s, and then Sleepy Hollow came online in 1996, the rearing facility.
Great, good. Okay, well, thank you all for participating in the panel. We're going to be having some presentations of the student projects next. So I'm going to turn the floor back over to Marie Butcher, and thank you again for being great panelists all.
Thank you, everyone. What a rich conversation we've had with all of our experts. So in case you missed any of our panels, yeah, thank you so much, Chanel. We really learned so much from you. And just big thanks to all three panels, all the experts on the line, and to our Indigenous representation today. Of course, we also have our events starting very soon at 1 o'clock at Garland Ranch Regional Park. But to close out our online session, we have a real treat for you. I'm going to just introduce Janet Kung, who has been a youth educator, watershed educator with us for several years now, and who has come back to work with the children. Every year they submit art, science, and poetry projects, and we are showcasing them here online, and then you can see many of them live at Garland Ranch Regional Park this afternoon. Again, those sessions start imminently at 1 o'clock. You can just go and be a walk-in and sign up for an event, or attend one of the activities, storytelling, walks, etc., that are on the native land there at Garland. So right now, I would like to introduce Janet, and I'm going to say thank you to everyone for attending this session. Again, if you missed anything, the recordings will be available on our YouTube channel. Thanks to all of our moderators and founders and our hosts. See you soon. Take care.
Thank you for the introduction, Marie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for participating in California Wildlife Day 2022 Student Art, Science, and Poetry Showcase. I'm your host, Janet. We will be playing slideshows of student work in the next 15 minutes, but during the showcase, if you see your work and feel like sharing a thought or two with us, or reciting your poem, or you feel like presenting your science poster, feel free to let us know in the chat box and we will give you the stage. And also don't be shy to type your thoughts, feedback in the chat box. We would love to hear from you. Without further ado, let's start it. That's all our student submissions. Thank you everyone for participating in our event. And special thanks to all the junior artists, naturalists, poets, scientists that created all these precious work. I also want to thank Tularcitos Elementary School, Robert Down Elementary School, Dual Language Academy of the Monterey Peninsula, International School of Monterey for participating this year. And we'll hopefully see you all at Garland. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Janet. Those
Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks everyone again for your participation in California Wildlife Day 2022. Can you shut down your Marie? Apologies if someone hears an echo. We really hope to see everyone out at Garland Ranch Regional Park. So we're going to be heading there now, and we hope that you'll join us for some kids activities, our nature walks. You can register for some of those on site. And then we'll have some snacks as well out there, and storytelling. So it'll be a really great time. And you can even see the kids' artwork out at Garland on site. So, and thank you so much for joining the online portion, and to all of our panelists. It was a really rich discussion and information, such important information. And we'll carry that forward to our website and also to our YouTube channel. So thank you everyone again. And we'll see you outside. And Lauren, I don't know if you have any final remarks.
Yes, we are truly hoping next year to have this as a in-person live event, as we have done in 2018 and 19. And we've had 2 years of virtual events, but we really can't wait to get back to having everybody in person and inside the big tent that we have had a couple of times before. So anyway, thanks for all your participation, and we look forward to seeing you on some of the walks this afternoon.
thank you so much, everyone.
Marie, you're muted.
Thank you. And we'll see you at Garland Ranch Regional Park. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.